My name is Betty Thomas, and I'm a member of the Monrovia Duarte Black Alumni Association. And during Black History Month, we have many activities. Today is story time in partnership with Monrovia Library. The story that you're going to hear now is about Belle. Belle, the Last Mule, G's Bend, a civil rights story by Calvin Alexander Ramsey, Betty Stroll, and illustrator John Holyfield. Belle, the Last Mule at G's Bend is a true moving tale about a not-so-ordinary mule in G's Bend, Alabama, that plays a key role in the civil rights movement and a young man who sees history anew. This small snapshot of the protest movement pays homage to both the determination of ordinary folks and the power of Dr. King's words. Belle, the Last Mule at G's Bend, encouraged readers to explore. It builds on what we likely already know about a familiar civil rights hero, a familiar hero of the civil rights movement, while teaching about lesser-known victories of the Benders in face of voter suppression and intimidation. While the story includes some momentous events, the overall story is intimate and warm.
Belle, the Last Mule at G's Bend, a civil rights story. Written by Calvin Alexander Ramsey and Betty Stroud, illustrated by John Holyfield. Alex sat on a bench outside the store. He wanted to go and play, but his mother had told him to wait for her. There was nothing to do on the porch but watch an old mule eating in the garden across the street. There was no breeze. Not a leaf moved in the chinaberry trees. It was so still that Alex could hear the mule munching on a row of bright-colored greens. He watched as the mule's big fuzzy ears twitched away a pesky fly. An old woman walked slowly up the wooden steps to the store and sat down on the bench next to Alex. She fanned herself with a folded newspaper. He looked at her out of the corner of his eye. She was watching the mule, too. The old woman chuckled and then said in a soft voice, "Myself, I like my collards cooked with some ham and spiced with vinegar." Alex smiled. "I was just thinking how that old mule sure can eat collards," said the woman.
"Is it allowed to? Eat someone's garden like that?"
asked Alex. "Old Belle, she can have all the collards she wants. She's earned it." The woman looked straight at Alex and said, "I let her loose, you see, and that's my garden. I thought I'd sit in the shade and rest a bit before I shooed her out."
"But ma'am, why do you let that mule eat your collard plants?"
"My name's Miss Petway, son," she said. "What's yours?"
"I'm Alex,"
he answered. "Well, Alex, there's enough greens in my garden for both of us, and Belle's a very special mule. She's a hero here in G's Bend. I like to show her some respect."
"What's so special about that old mule?"
Alex said as he stood up. The woman took a deep breath. "Now, that's a long story, but if you have some time to sit—" She patted the bench. Alex hesitated. He wondered if she was just a crazy old lady, but he was curious, and after all, there was nothing else to do. "G's Bend has always been poor," she began. "There's not much here but farmland. We always needed mules to help us work the land. Not many of us could afford a car."
"How could you get anywhere?"
Alex asked. "Well, that's just it. Benders. That's what we called ourselves here. Used mules to haul most everything. Belle's been with us for many years now. She was here the day Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to speak to us way back in 1965.
"I know about Dr. Martin Luther King from school. Did you get to meet him?"
Alex asked. "Oh, yes, sir, I did. That night there was a terrible storm. Lots of people thought he wouldn't make it to see us poor folks. I waited not far from here with Belle. It was past midnight when Dr. King finally arrived, but he still spoke to us that night and nearly took the roof off Pleasant Grove Baptist Church with his wonderful words.
What did he say?
Alex asked. Well, in those days, we had a ferry to cross the river into Camden, where there were jobs and stores. Dr. King told us to take the ferry to Camden and register to vote. Cross the river for freedom, he sang out that night, and even though we were poor dirt farmers, descendants of slaves with only mules to carry our loads, he said, I come over here to G's Bend to tell you, you are somebody. He told us we had a right to vote. You understand, Alex, back then no black person from Wilcox County had ever dared to vote.
Were you scared?
Alex asked. Miss Petway sighed and thought for a moment. I don't think we were scared, not after Dr. King spoke to us. We felt strong, like our mules, and we did just what he told us to do. So many went to register that we almost swamped that little ferry. Some Benders went on to march with Dr. King in Selma, in Montgomery, in Birmingham, and in the March on Washington. Benders are loyal, like mules, too. Miss Petway added, chuckling.
We read about all those marches in school,
Alex added. But we must have scared the white folks in Camden, because the next thing we knew, they shut down the ferry. The white sheriff was a big bully who wanted to keep us in our place. He told reporters,
We didn't close the ferry because they were black. We closed it because they forgot they were black.
So, when it came time to vote, we had no way to cross the river. But we wouldn't be stopped. Benders are like old Belle here, not fancy, but strong and steady and stubborn. We filled our few cars with as many people as could fit, and then our mules carried wagon loads of people round the river all day to vote. It took half a day to get there, but it was worth it. We sang and clapped all the way into town. Folks in Camden sure were surprised.
You showed them, Alex laughed. Is that why Belle's your hero?
There is more to it. A lot of people here lost their jobs in Camden because they voted. Things got bad. With no jobs, we had no money for food. So some of us joined the Freedom Quilting Bee in Alberta. And eventually we started our own, called ourselves the G's Bend Quilters. You see, the women of G's Bend had always made quilts. Some of the most beautiful quilts in the world were made right here. Soon they were being sold all over the United States. We became famous.
That's why I'm here. My mother came here to shop for a quilt today,
Alex explained.
That's a happy ending, isn't it?
But it's not the end of the story for Belle. Miss Petway's voice turned softer. Alex, do you remember learning in school what happened on the 4th of April in 1968? Alex looked into Miss Petway's eyes and saw how sad they looked.
That's when Dr. King got shot, isn't it?
He asked, and for the first time, he felt the sadness himself. Yes, everyone in G's Bend was grieved. Miss Petway took a deep breath and looked out at the trees. A slight breeze seemed to shuffle the leaves. We got a phone call asking if our mules could pull Dr. King's coffin through the streets of Atlanta during the funeral parade. They wanted to use our mules, not fancy draft horses. Mules take their time, work hard, and they never back down. Mules aren't pretty, but they are somebody. It meant so much to us that Benders could honor the memory of Dr. King. Belle and another mule named Ada were loaded onto a truck to begin their journey to Atlanta. But as usual, it wasn't going to be easy. State policemen stopped the truck and asked the drivers to show them a permit for hauling livestock across state lines. They threatened to arrest the drivers when they didn't have the papers, told them they'd have to turn back. We got the word to Dr. King's headquarters in Atlanta about what had happened, and they called the state police and the governors of Alabama and Georgia. They told them it would look shameful on TV and in the news all over the nation if they refused to let our mules pull the funeral train. After that, the troopers escorted our Belle and Ada right into Atlanta.
Belle pulled Dr. Martin Luther King's coffin?
Alex asked. Yes, sir. Belle and Ada bravely pulled that wagon 3.5 miles through streets that were full of grieving, weeping people. As they passed, people reached out and touched the mules and the casket. Imagine the thousands of arms and hands reaching out to them. But they kept moving, slow and steady. They didn't back down or get scared, just kept going. The funeral was televised around the world. 60,000 people gathered around the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and tens of thousands more lined the streets. We were very proud, and that's why I love our last mule here at G's Bend, and why I let Belle eat all the collard greens she wants.
Alex and Miss Petway turned to look at old Belle, who stopped her munching and looked up at them.
They both laughed. Yep, she's had her fill, Miss Petway said, slowly rising off the bench. Want to go meet her?
Yes, ma'am.
Alex skipped down the steps and over to Belle, who let him scratch her fuzzy ears. Alex looked into the mule's eyes and thought about all the history she had seen.
Thank you for telling me about Belle,
Alex said. Now you know what Dr. King meant when he told us that even though we led simple, hard lives, we were still somebody, she said.
And even an old mule can be a hero,
Alex added. Miss Petway smiled and walked away, leading Belle behind her.